069-1616 and 01700. Here's a suggestion. You got a question or comment? Perhaps you can get a pen, pencil, piece of paper, write it down so that when you're getting on the show, you're well organized. And you take as little time as possible so we can accommodate as many of you as we can. We ask only, first of all, you respect yourself and then respect others, because we'll not accept anything we deem not within our broadcast standards. Again, thank you all for joining us. This is your voice in the community, thought that get results. Tonight, Dr. Patricia Bartlett, good evening.
Good evening, Rebo. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to the entire listening and viewing audiences. Good evening to Naya, wherever you are tonight. I noticed that the chair is not even there. I can't say it's empty, it's just not even there. So I'm assuming that you would not be joining us tonight, but wherever you are, we are with you in prayers. And indeed, to my number one fan in the UK, I'd just like to say good evening. And to my friends in St. Thomas, USVI, and Anne, Pam, Mr. Martin, good evening. Good to have you in our company.
Ted Hobson, good evening.
Good evening, Webo, and good evening to my fellow panelists. As usual, Webo, it's always a great honor to be having a conversation with the people of this country, wherever they may be, whether they are in the Caribbean or further afield. And I'm hoping tonight to have a very good discussion. Good night, Webo.
The Honorable Spencer Brand, good evening.
Good evening, Weber, and a very pleasant good evening to my colleagues around the table. Let me say good evening to all those who are viewing and listening to this edition of Let's Talk. Weber, I want to take this opportunity to offer condolences to all those families who are in mourning tonight. I know of the passing of a dear friend of mine from Cotton Ground, a sweet old lady, Gwendolyn Jones. I want to offer my condolences to her husband and her family there. My friend Ball Jones there in the US. I certainly want to say to them how saddened I am to learn of the passing of Gwendolyn. Weber, also we also had a tragic accident today where a young man lost his life. I want to also use this opportunity to offer my condolences to the entire family of that young man. It's just an awful situation there in the Chickenstone area, and I want to use this opportunity to offer my heartfelt condolences to the entire family. A number of other families, Weber, who are in mourning tonight, and like I said, I certainly want to use this opportunity from this rostrum of Von Radio to echo my condolences to all those who are going through that period at this time, and I hope that they can remember their loved one with fond memory, despite the difficult period that they are going through. In the same vein, Weber, I also want to say to those persons who might be celebrating tonight, whether it's a birthday, a wedding anniversary, or some accomplishment in their life, I want to offer them my congratulations. And I hope that they can enjoy the celebration in moderation. And I believe that while we celebrate, we can also hope that they can do it with some sense of care and responsibility. Weber, good night, and it's indeed a pleasure for me to be here once again, and thanks so much for the invitation.
I want to go straight on to point out something that I want to deal with first tonight. And I know, persons may have other things they probably like to touch as well. But I want to point out that I've been noticing of late that there are a number of motion of no confidence have been happening across the islands. And you see, it is my view that it's important to take note of these things so that at the end of the day, we don't end up like what is happening in some instances now. We are wondering, where did this come from? How did we get where we are? So I notice that a lot of it is happening, and St. Lucia had one the other day which seemingly, if you, I didn't follow it that closely, but based on what you picked up, was bound to fail. You know, it didn't have a chance. And then we know what's happening with Venezuela. The Honorable Prime Minister is off to that event on behalf of CARICOM to see whether or not they can mediate. And the Honorable Mark Brantley, the Honorable Premier, is also, he's taking along the Honorable Premier with him. And I would there want to add for his negotiation skills. Because we know that in that arena, in that area, the Honorable Mark Brantley has, you know, an awesome bank, so to speak, and other members of the Caribbean community as well. And I did speak with the Honorable Premier, and he basically told me that the situation, based on the reports we were getting as well, is very fragile. And it is almost, you know, it's on the brink of a civil war, because no party at this juncture seems as if they want to give in. And then different countries are taking different positions. And so it is set up, so it's very, very fragile. And the thing that is interesting about that is that it's not too long ago that Venezuela was helping the small islands and so on and so forth. And I keep reminding us all that Guyana was of great wealth at one point, and Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. So it's not that these islands have a want of resources, and Haiti as well, but they have a common problem. It's politics. And these are the things that I think we've got to monitor and guard against. So I just wanted to point that out. We'll take a break and then we will come right back. This is Thought That Get Results. Dr. Patricia Bartlett, Ted Hobson, the Honorable Spencer Brand. When we come back, we'll add Edric W. Stanley right after this.
Just arriving at Builders Paradise. Brand new mirror bypass doors. Sizes include 4 feet, 5 feet, and 6 feet. Oh, and don't forget to check out their Saturday yard sale for even better discounts. Builders Paradise, where your island dreams begin.
From Queen City, Nevis, this is the powerhouse of the Eastern Caribbean, Vaughn Radio.
Back on this episode of Thought That Get Results with the Honorable Spencer Brand, Ted Hobson, Dr. Patricia Bartlett, and Edric W. Stanley. Good evening.
Good evening, Webbo. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to the people who are listening to us on the World Wide Web, throughout the Caribbean Basin, in St. Kitts, but more particularly, the people of Nevis. Of course, every Tuesday night, this is your station for information and, of course, entertainment. But we will always be guided by the information we disseminate from the mics of Vaughn Radio. And last evening while we were here, I had Venezuela on my list. But when you asked me, I mentioned the weather, simply because you had already brought that to the fore. And Tuesday night before that, I had aviation and airports on my list. But sometimes the topics that we brought to the fore, of course, we have to give it the attention. And once we have finished our information, dissemination of information, and commentary on those topics, sometimes time doesn't permit us to, in fact, say much. And therefore, you have brought Venezuela to the fore. And maybe I should put my 2 cents in this regard. Leadership, of course, is somewhat special, and not everybody has the quality to lead, but sometimes people eventually get into the position of leadership and may not have the real quality to lead in the way they should lead. You've mentioned the resources of these countries, a few countries, and we know that the leaders sometimes do not do the right thing when it comes to working with what they've got. But power, of course, sometimes throw the train off the rail. And in this regard, we see what's happening in Venezuela. I don't see a civil war in Venezuela. I believe that the time has come and the clock is ticking, and President Maduro would recognize that he has to leave and leave the country without plunging it into a civil war. The siding of so many countries with the opposition leader is a clear indication that his time has come for him to give up power. And in that regard, I would say this, that pressure must be brought to bear on him to ensure that the people of Venezuela, and more importantly, the people of the West, are not drawn into this civil war and whatever the aftermath would be. In the past, Russia has sent in 2 major jets, and Trump, for whatever reason, did not address that, but I felt that this was a sure sign that Venezuela was slipping down the road of, I guess, civil war, but I do not see it. And I hope that he would recognize that his time has come for him to give up power and to give his people, more or less, the type of country that they deserve. Webo, there is a tragic accident that occurred this afternoon. And sometimes we wonder why good people, what the master sees, the master knows. And I would send out a warning.
Okay, let me just deal with the Venezuela issue and the issue with the motion of no confidence and so on. Let me go to Ted. Ted, the frequency of this method now of using the motion of no confidence by political parties or oppositions and so on and so forth. What do you make of it?
Well, we don't need to go as far as St. Lucia. Right here in the Federation, we had a motion of no confidence brought by the opposition in December, and on, I think, Boxing Day or Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve. There was the debate in the Parliament. It was quite clear that there was no question of the opposition gaining any points on that, except to express what they feel about the government. It was, hopefully, it was supposed to be a way of demonstrating that they have a chance of winning in the next election, or that, you know, all the grievances they have against the government, and they thought they'll have a platform. Unfortunately for them, the date set was on Christmas Eve, and nobody's listening to any radio about politics on Christmas Eve. So that went by the way. The one in St. Lucia, Webo, again, there was no likelihood that the opposition would win, but it's another play to the public to in a sense let the government party know that they are in the wings and they are not asleep. You had one in Guyana. It wasn't expected. The opposition wasn't expected to win, but apparently, so it is said. One of the government had only a 1-seat majority, and that 1-seat majority, and one of the parliamentarians decided to go with the other side, and not only did he go with the other side, he ran away the next day. So he's somewhere in Canada, and now the whole of Guyana is in a sort of turmoil because the government wasn't expecting to have to go to the country, and the governing party has sought relief from the court, and the court has decided against them, and now they're saying they're going to the CCJ, and that is just playing for time. But all it is that all over the world, people are playing for power. You call it politics, but it's the urge to be in charge, the urge to want to dominate, and that is what is happening. And you have it being played out in the United States with Trump and the opposition and all of that. But it's really an urge to want to be on top, and it's getting more and more so. And governments in Africa are also having real problems because they don't want to leave power, and that is the problem.
And Ted, I might add here also that in the British Virgin Islands, they're having an early election because in terms of the last comment that you just made, they couldn't get it right either. The government split in two. And so that party that was in government ended up making two parties.
Yes.
So one of them became a government minister, went on the opposition benches, became leader of a new party.
Yeah.
And so they have a number of parties, and they had an early election. So that is due on the 25th of February.
Yeah.
And, you know, it speaks again to, as you said, the point that you last made, and everybody wants to be in charge.
And that is what's happening all over the world, Webo. And so we are going to have these issues. Insofar as Venezuela is concerned, I certainly don't agree with Mr. Stanley. There was, in fact, a presidential election not very long ago. I mean, the Americans said it was a fraud, and other people said it was a fraud and all of that. But for them to appoint somebody as president of, who have never tested the water, who has never really shown that he could command the majority, he's able to mobilize protests and so forth. But I think it's a bit much for them to start recognizing somebody as president of a country, which I mean, there is sovereignty. I mean, the United Nations Charter stipulates against intervention in other people's country, but America has this feeling that they have to dominate and they have to intervene everywhere, which has caused a whole lot of problems throughout the world. They went into Iraq against the wishes of the United Nations. They destroyed the country, and millions of people died. They went into Libya, again intervened, and the place is a basket case. They have about 3 governments there fighting one another. Afghanistan, now I understand they're leaving there. So all those people who died have died in vain. They went into Vietnam. Over 3 million Vietnamese were killed in that, and in the end they still had to leave. So, you know, you wonder why they always intervene in other people's country.
And the flip side of that, though, Ted, tell that to the people who feel oppressed.
Yeah.
And the people, for instance, in this case, Venezuela, who can't get anything to eat.
I understand that.
And so on and so forth. But, so it is just a very difficult situation. And I was just making the point earlier that why is it that so many people have to suffer to satisfy the hunger of power of 1 or 2 people, you know?
In the case of Venezuela, we have a real dilemma. We have a serious dilemma because Venezuela and Maduro and Chavez before him has been very, very, very generous to all these islands, particularly Cincos and Nevis. Only the other day, they gave over $16 million, not very long ago. It's scarcely 2-3 years ago, you know.
But was it a strategy, though? Because if I look after you real good, knowing that there's danger ahead, you probably will remember that and probably support me.
Well, Chavez was helping them when he was strong, you know, so that can't be the thing.
Right, but you see, also one can argue he was helping them, but when he was strong. But also remember the policies that you employ. sometimes the long-term effects of a particular policy, some of it a short-term effect, and it looks good, but the long-term effects of it can be hazardous.
Yeah, but, you know, as I said, we are in a horn of the dilemma. I remember many years ago when Mandela who became president of South Africa. He was being interviewed by a British journalist, and he was asked why it is you don't condemn Fidel Castro and the Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi.
Help him.
Yeah, he said, why should I? When we needed help, they're the ones who were there helping us. Why should I condemn them? You know, and the same thing, we have a real problem.
Yeah. Dr. Bartlett?
Yeah, about on the issue of the motion of no confidence, I agree totally with what Mr. Hobson, you know, would have said earlier. It's just about power, and it is so unfair to the people, because all this political instability, it doesn't bode well for any country. You know, we don't progress, and it seems as if at any cost, you know, people would go to any lengths, you know, just to try to get in power, and it can't be fair. If the voters would have voted in a government, let them serve the term. But this idea of always going in the house, and sometimes, you know, like in Guyana, it succeeded. I don't know if that is the will of the people necessarily, you know, to throw out the government that was there, not giving them a fair opportunity to serve for the period of time that they were elected to serve. But notwithstanding, we see it continuing, and I suspect that most of these countries, the same operative, they use the same people, you know, the same consultants. They use them and they rotate them and they loan them out to one another around the Caribbean. That is something, you know, so these strategies, sometimes these things are alien, some things that are alien to us, you know, just, you know, keep popping up. But it's, I guess it's a part of the beast. That is the nature of the beast as it relates to politics. You know, men just want to dominate, and it doesn't matter. The country is going to, you know, to pieces, and people are still holding on. I mean, in some places the outcome have been, you know, maybe a little better, but in most of the places when these things happen, when you have outside intervention, you know, it really doesn't bode well for the country, because America, they have I don't understand their strategy, and I think seriously at some point, well, maybe it's expecting too much, and Stanley's always raving about his his president. But I don't know if we really should have expected much more. But it seems to me like the foreign policy of that country really is in disarray. They seem not to be consistent in the way they apply, you know, the foreign policy, if there is indeed one. It is just not consistent. How do you, you know, explain or rationalize the fact that in Venezuela you're going to intervene on the pretext that people in Venezuela are starving and it's a humanitarian crisis there, when you're the one, due to the policies that you would have instituted, you're the ones who really would have precipitated the whole thing, you know, because that was orchestrated by the US, you know, going, you know, the man selling the oil and can't get him money. I mean, how could that be fair? How is he going to feed his people? You know, and then you have some people in the Caribbean, you're saying you think that we should all be friends, but you have some people in the Caribbean who just not deciding that they should be grateful for the, you know, the help that we would have gotten from Venezuela over the years, mind you. They didn't just start helping us last year or the year before because they thought that they would be in trouble. They've been helping us for years. Even in Jamaica, Petrojam, they had, you know, shares in Petrojam in Jamaica. They, you know, the Jamaican government have, you know, they've moved to, you know, acquire the shares that, you know, Venezuela would have had in the oil industry there. So I don't know that this thing in Venezuela is going to end well. I don't think that Chavez should be moved out because of external pressure. Let it be from Maduro, sorry. Let it be from the, you know, from the people. I don't know how, and it's against, like Mr. Hobson said, it's against international rules. You know, you don't international law. You don't, as a sovereign country, have, you know, other people dictating to you who ought to be in charge. This chap Guado, who young chap, I guess he's ambitious. But the thing is, the Constitution, I guess, gives him some latitude to be able to do some things. but still at the expense of the people. I don't think so. I think the intervention that CARICOM is embarking on is a good initiative. They need to see if they can get the parties really to come together and get this thing worked out, you know, in a political way. I don't think that it is fair to the people of Venezuela, because from what I've read, almost 3 million, of those people have already left, and they're not going to addresses that, you know, they know of, you know, they're just leaving because things are so grave in Venezuela right now. And you said 3 million out of 30 million people leaving, that is like 10% of the population would have already left right there. And I don't think, you know, the intervention from the US is really helping, and I don't know what their end game is, because, you know, Guyana is going to be having oil soon, so if it is about the oil, they could, you know, they already have Exxon moving in there. I mean, I really don't understand what their end game is, but, you know, it's just not fair what they're doing to Venezuela, you know, and somebody needs to take a step back. And I'm hoping, you know, that the report that the human rights expert would have, you know, delivered to the UN, I'm hoping that they would be guided by that. And I'm hoping that they would see it fit to back off and let the people resolve the issue. So they're asking for elections, I mean, which was quite unreasonable. I think the EU would have given them 8 days. I mean, who calls an election in 8 days? That is just unreasonable. They can't do it, and they have a structure in place. How do they expect that Venezuela, in the chaos that they have now, how do they expect that they were going to be able to meet that, you know, in 8 days, call an election in 8 days? That is just unreasonable. And what if they call an election and Maduro wins? What then? They're going to still reject him? I don't understand what their game is. Because the thing is, in the US, they said they had free and fair elections, and still most of the people in the US not satisfied, not satisfied with what they got. You know, but nobody's invading, you know, and right now they have, you know, they're probing into, you know, interference from Russia, you know, in America. Now, it would be against the law, for international law, for Russia to interfere in their elections, but it's not against the law for them to interfere in someone else's country. I don't understand where fairness is. And when we were growing up, people used to start conversations like this. Webo, you think it is fair? And I have to pose the question. You think it is fair what they're doing to Venezuela? Can't be fair.
Dr. Patricia Bartlett, Ted Hobson, Edric W. Stanley, the Honorable Spencer Brand will be back right after these.
When VON vibrates, the whole Caribbean must shake.
860 AM, the Powerhouse.
Just arriving at Builders Paradise. Brand new mirror bypass doors. Sizes include 4 feet, 5 feet, and 6 feet. Oh, and don't forget to check out their Saturday yard sale for even better discounts. Builders Paradise, where your island dreams begin.
Back on this episode of Thought That Get Results with Dr. Patricia Bartlett, the Honorable Spencer Brand, Edric W. Stanley, and Ted Hobson. Your phone calls a little later on 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. Ted, let me just get back to you a bit and ask the question in reference to the motion of no confidence votes. And from a legal standpoint, Ted, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we hardly heard of it being used. Now, it is seemingly being used frequently. At what point you think something might have to be done? Because I gather there's no stopping anybody from bringing it maybe at any time. And then when somebody starts using it almost as a tactic, you know, it causes some sort of disarray and so on and so forth. And then if anybody tries to, let's say, don't have it and so on, it can, you know, develop some instability.
Well, about the constitution of all these countries that got their constitution from the British government, or had in it this right to question the the strength of the government, and in the past it wasn't used because people were more sensible and they were not as power hungry.
So that's a light moment.
I suppose so. People were more sensible. No, well, you see, my thing is that people have become more power hungry now. It seemed to me,
and consequently senseless.
Well, you know,
or less sensible.
What's the point in St. Lucia of going and they know they're going to lose? You know, except to create some kind of tension in the country and disagreement and hope on one side that they could somehow get government members to cross the floor and all that kind of thing. But to me, it's a waste of time, and as Pat says, you know, it really doesn't help the country at all.
But Ted, you see, what happens is this. As you mentioned, people were more sensible. But you see, what happens is people are more outspoken now. They're perhaps more recognized and consequently want to exercise the rights that they have, sometimes without you know, applying the necessary reason.
It's true, Webo. I mean, government has far more power than they used to have in the old days. I remember when Labour was in government and I was Assistant Attorney General in the 60s. Ministers of government didn't go probably as far as Antigua. Now ministers of government gone all over the world, Dubai, this and that. And they have all kinds of power and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's very attractive to ambitious people to want to be in the government seat and all that kind of thing. And it encourages fierce disagreement, and you scarcely ever have an issue in which both sides agree to it. It's similar in the United States, for instance. I mean, tonight you are going to have the State of the Union, and somebody asks what you think Stacey Abraham is going to say, who is speaking for the Democrats. And he said, whatever Trump says, she's going to say the opposite.
The opposite, yeah.
So you don't have people coming together. That's the unfortunate thing about it. There are no issues in this country where the Labour Party will support, no matter what.
Well,
and take the RSS. We all accept that the RSS have been here. Very few murders have taken place. In fact, only one since they've been here now 3 or 4 months. But yet, up to this week, Dr. Douglas said the RSS came to harass the opposition, and they must go. You know, I mean...
But you see, Ted, I beg to differ with a fact, with the point that you made in terms of opposing everything. Mm-hmm. There was a particular politician in Nevis whose name I'd rather not highlight, but he was in opposition, and he was in the House, as a matter of fact, so this was on the record. Mm-hmm. And they had a particular bill. And he said, well, he's going to support it because people are telling him he is in the opposition, he's supposed to oppose.
Yeah.
But the problem he has, so what happens if they decide they're going to raise his salary? Should he oppose that too?
Yeah, well, that is unfortunate because there are certain issues which are really not political and not party political. That is for the good of the country, and I think both sides should salute and praise and support and all of that. But that doesn't happen. Even in each one of them, when they're in, they attack the other one on crime. And you know, I mean, if you listen to the Labour Party politicians knocking the government, and in 1 year they had 32 murders, 32, and yet they have the nerve to be attacking the government, no matter what the government does in trying to resolve the matter. So really, I mean, it doesn't help the debate. It doesn't help the debate, and it gives it mislead the people of this country, at least part of them anyway.
But it's the art of politics, isn't it? Because people always seem to criticize negative campaigning. But the research and the evidence shows that it works.
Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Brand.
Yes, well, thank you. You've put two issues on the table. One, the motion of no confidence, and of course the fiasco that is now taking place in Venezuela. I've looked, Webo, at this motion of no confidence and consider them as a mechanism basically by the opposition to try and hasten the government to call an election. I believe that they would have, that's basically what it is. We have looked at what would have taken place in Guyana. Guyana, there was a 50-50 chance, I believe, that the opposition felt that they could have succeeded. Perhaps they knew things that the rest of us did not know. And that succeeded. We also had one in St. Kitts and Nevis and one in St. Lucia. But the margin of seats for the government against the opposition was far greater than what we saw in Guyana. So it was very unlikely that those would have succeeded. I look at it as a ploy also, Webo, or to create the kind of doubt in the general populace in the government. As I believe that all of these opposition parties have one mission, to try and get into government. And the mechanism that they have sought to use is this motion of no confidence. We here in St. Kitts and Nevis would have had one languishing around for how much months?
2 years.
2 years. I thought, Webo, at that time, the former Prime Minister then made a mistake to have allowed that particular motion of no confidence to, I said it right here, that he should have allowed the motion of no confidence and then go to the people based on the makeup at the time. It is an option in our constitution. All of these constitutions that were handed down by Great Britain, it is in our constitution. It is the right of the opposition to do so. Whether they would succeed or not, that's a different matter. Like I said, it's a mechanism, I think, we're able to try and push an election. I guess a lot of opposition are not prepared to wait now for 5 years or 4 years. If they can get an election every 6 months or every year, they wouldn't mind doing it.
Mr. Brand, with your permission, before you go on, I'd just like to get a little more clarification or explanation as to why you thought that it was a mistake that the then Prime Minister Douglas did not allow the motion to be heard. Well, the fact is, though, I mean, technically it was not really him; it was the speaker. But you understand what I meant, because right?
Yes, Mamo.
Yes.
To be technically correct.
Yes,
the speaker.
Right, but I understand the point you're making, and in that regard, I ask, why do you think, or why do you say, in your view, it was a mistake for them not to allow it to have gone forward at that time?
2 reasons, Webo. The Constitution would have said, I don't remember the exact language, but as quickly as possible. That's one. And two, I felt that the members of the opposition at the time was not as organized. They were allowed to organize themselves to take on the Labour Party at the time. 2 years was a long time for them to get themselves organized and sort themselves out.
Or maybe they knew something that you didn't know.
Who? The government? Maybe that
No,
too.
the opposition. Well, who brought the motion of no confidence?
Because
but the evidence. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, I was saying Pat is correct, because the other two were still was still sitting on the Labour benches when Honourable Mark Brantley brought it.
Well, like Dr. Badley said, things that we may not have known.
but in the end, the evidence showed that Dr. Badley was right, because and maybe Dr. Douglas also knew things that you didn't know.
Obviously.
And right, so he obviously knew or felt that it would carry.
Yeah.
That's what
So
I'm doing.
that is against that backdrop that I asked. What was your rationale to suggest that he ought to have let it go? Because if you were in a position, Mr. Brand, and the Honorable Premier has the within his purview the right to call the election, and if you felt that at a particular point in time, suppose hypothetically at this point, you felt a little weak, and the Honorable Premier says to you, Mr. Brand, I'm thinking about calling the election next month. What do you think? If you feel a little weak, and you know that you got at least another year, which you can do certain things to strengthen your position, what are you going to do?
That's a fair assessment. I think that everyone would assess themselves and look and see where they are in the scheme of things and say, look, boss, I am not totally ready. 6 months, 8 months. I mean,
okay, so let me put this to you. Is it possible that Dr. Harris, who was at the time on the government benches, Honorable Sam Kanda also, who was still on the benches at the time, and was there another one? There was some underground current about Dr. Martin at the time, right? And so if you were in Dr. Douglas's shoes at the time, you would have put it on the table. You'd allowed it to go.
I thought so, but I thought
Really?
that it allowed, like I said, I thought that it allowed the...
No, I'm saying that at the time when you're saying that Dr. Douglas ought to have let it come, you had a situation where this is what no doubt Dr. Douglas's intelligence might have been telling him.
Well,
yes.
Absolutely. If your intelligence was telling you, Webo, that you would lose, one, that you had two of your members would definitely vote against you and cause the government to fall, then obviously you would have had to look for another strategy to prolong and get out of it.
And the evidence shows that he did.
He did.
Okay. I just wanted to clear that up, but you go ahead.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, Webo, and the situation in Venezuela, this is a situation, Webo, that has been boiling for some time. And this is as a result of what is happening in Venezuela now is as a matter of people power, what I call people power. I think that the Venezuelan people cannot continue to go to supermarkets and can't find water and can't find milk and can't find baby food and so on. You look at the pictures of mothers holding their children in their arms and going into the supermarket and nothing there for the children. So this is something that has been building up, and I call it people power, where they feel that even though Venezuela is theoretically a very wealthy country, the dictatorship that they would have had under Chavez and now Maduro did not bring the benefit to the people. And I believe that the people of Venezuela would have reached to a stage where they have said enough is enough.
But that's an interesting point you're making, Mr. Brand, against the backdrop that we just heard how glorious Chavez did, and then later on in terms of giving out stuff and helping people and so on and so forth. So that's a very important point that you just made.
But
yes,
just yes,
Webo,
2018, you know?
Webo, even though that Chavez might have done a lot of these things externally, if you look at what Chavez have done a lot of things externally to other countries. But sadly, a majority of the people in Venezuela were suffering.
How did you arrive at that, though? How did you arrive at that?
What, that people
assessment that the majority were suffering?
Well, if people can't find food to eat, and if people don't feel safe in their country, and if people can provide for themselves, people are suffering.
That's happening in Haiti.
Yeah.
I don't see you invading Haiti.
You don't see we invading Haiti?
I don't see anybody.
No, but-
So who have invaded Venezuela? Nobody has invaded Venezuela.
The blockade is what the economic blockade is what is hurting the people in Venezuela. They're not doing it to themselves. Maduro is not withholding food from his people. It's not like he has food and withholding it from his people.
Well, there's an exodus, a very large exodus of people
Leaving Venezuela.
who have left Venezuela.
Yes, because nothing is there.
And it is based on poor leadership.
No, it's well.
You've got
the U.S.
a country that is wealthy. The country is wealthy.
Absolutely.
And you can make a comparison with Venezuela, Guyana, and other countries that are wealthy, but because of poor leadership, the wealth is not being distributed, it is not managed well, and as a consequence, the people are suffering.
No, that's not.
The evidence is there. If you got a country and the country is rich, why don't you allow the wealth to be spread among your people? Give land, give more money, allow people to have the...
But Edric, isn't that exactly what Chavez and they were trying to do? They control the resources and then give this and give that. And so, as a consequence of those policies now, isn't that why Venezuela is where they are?
No, Weber, they gave outward. But what I'm saying to you, internally, if the people have not received what they're supposed to get with reference to the quality of life...
But the policies that they employ in that sort of socialist and method and so on and so forth, you know, the state controls most of the resources and then they distribute in some manner to the people. So that's the system they employ.
Yes, I understand that. But what I'm saying to you, if you realize that it is not working to enhance the quality of life of your people, they are going to rebel. They're going to eventually leave the country simply because things are not the way they expect when the country has the wealth.
So the question I have to ask you is, what method or policy or system therefore, because you said what they needed to have done was to distribute the wealth evenly, correct?
More so.
So then I'm asking you then, what system then are you proposing that they should have used?
It's the same system, it's just that you have to expand the system. And if you, for some reason, you're myopic in view and not operating at the seat of the pants, to understand that your people are dissatisfied with what you're doing, they're ultimately going to demonstrate you're not running the country well.
So in essence, then you're suggesting they ought to have changed the system.
Expand the system, Weston. I'm not saying to change.
Okay. So what do you mean by expanding it? In other words, let us say they have 30 million people. You're suggesting maybe only 20 was getting and the other 10 was not? Something like that?
Based on people who are dissatisfied, it's a clear demonstration that the people weren't getting what they were supposed to have gotten. And
well,
as a result,
could that be part of the problem? They were trying to get it without maybe the work, because remember, you know, that part of those policies, some of it which we are implementing down the road, when people begin to get things
free. Don't misunderstand me. I am saying there are people who you must help as a country. You must help your people. At the same time, if you are
but I want you
to
be as specific as you can, because I borrow your phrase, you like to say how when stuff emanate from the mics of Von Radio, you hope maybe Maduro is hearing you and stuff like that. So I wanted to narrow it down, define it, so just perhaps he hears you. It might yes, it might help. Or somebody might give him the message.
It is clearly demonstrated, Webo, that the people who have left the country were dissatisfied. And it is clearly demonstrated, based on what we see on the channels, the television, that stores are empty, but yet the country has a tremendous amount of wealth. And
we understand that. What you're doing is just repeating the facts. What I want you to do is address this and provide a solution.
The solution is to, in fact, give people more money and bring them back into the country. Land, houses, education, you name it.
Dr. Bartlett, do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that. That's not what
she
I
doesn't
don't think
agree, but yet she has a socialist view because she has come here with many things to say. Government should do this, government should do that. I'm saying to you, you've got a rich government, you've got a rich country, and your people are impoverished.
So in other words,
your leadership
she advocates a socialist view, and now you are trying to use it. She is going against you.
Well,
you're not.
No,
He's not claiming
because she doesn't.
No. He's my understanding, Ted, is that Edric is charging that Dr. Bartlett advocates socialist views. Am I correct, Edric?
That is correct.
Right, and he just decided to use a socialist view, right, in social approach, thank you, Mr. Brand,
no.
in order to solve the problem. And Dr. Bartlett says no.
And he's a socialist.
Right, and so I'm asking Edric if his point is that she is advocating these views, and now I'm using it, she says no, don't use it.
Well, I think she lacked pragmatism. And in that regard,
okay, let me just take this. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Hey,
good evening.
I like the story that you are talking about. I want to know. Guyana, which are and they come here and blogging from Hardy. So them at them up. Okay.
Enjoy your evening, okay?
Rebel,
yes, go ahead, Dr. Bartlett.
Let me just clarify. You asked him for a solution. He said that the solution was to just give the people more money and let them come back, and give them whatever, let them come back. And I said that is not, I don't think that for the situation as it is, that is what's going to work. It's not like they didn't have money. They have money there, but they have something they call hyperinflation, because if you have money and you can't find nothing to buy with it, whatever is there to be bought is going to cost you much more. And they had inflation as high as over 1,000,000%, whatever, who could ever conceptualize that in Venezuela. The problem is that the U.S. needs to take the hands off of Venezuela. You can't embargo the people. You cannot. It is not humane. What they're doing to Venezuela is not humane. You need the people sell the oil. That is how they make money.
And you're holding
and that is and you're going to hold on to it. How are they going to buy food? Which is taking away the people's money and then say, okay, we'll give you some aid, we'll give you some food. No. That is just, in this day and age, that is reprehensible. That should not happen.
You have to be a global thinker.
Do I detect Dr. Bartlett?
You have to be a global thinker.
Are you suggesting that you basically are suggesting that the essence of the problem that Venezuela has, the root of it deals with the United States?
Yes. Pure and simple.
Can't be.
Pure and simple.
Can't be. It's myopic leadership.
Venezuela,
what I'm saying to you,
you don't understand what's going on. But you don't understand what's going on in Venezuela.
Send your product onto world markets, which you've got an abundance of oil, and therefore, in the free enterprise system, you are able to reduce your price, even though you've got OPEC and all that. Reduce your price, send your product onto world markets, bring back the hard currency to ensure that you've got a certain amount of wealth to distribute, to buy food, medicine, clothing, shelter. You got the wealth in terms of a product, and you are afraid to utilize it. It is lack of leadership. And because of the lack of leadership, you are blaming United States for your problem. United States has to protect its borders, has to protect the West.
What are you talking about?
What I mean is that you cannot allow the Soviet Union to, or not the Soviet Union anymore, but Russia, to play in the back door of the West.
But why?
As a result,
why is U.S.
begin to understand that he has misled the country? He has not managed the resources of the country well, and therefore he needs to go. And in that regard,
you watch too much American TV. You have no clue what's going on. You need to read a little more and watch less TV.
I have no clue what's
it
going
has
on.
nothing to do
I have
what you're saying.
From
Stanley, you
my
need
own,
to.
with my own bootstraps from where I
Can I just give you
was
some
to
advice,
where
though?
I am. You're not going to give me any advice.
I would like to give you some free advice.
No, I'm not going to take it because I don't think you have it.
It's
Okay, okay. Why don't we take a break and come right back?
Yeah.
This is Thought That Get Results. Edric W. Stanley, Dr. Patricia Bartlett, Ted Hobson, the Honorable Spencer Brand. We'll be back after these.
Sugar City St. Kitts. Keep it sweet. Keep listening to Vaughn.
Back on this episode of Thought That Get Results with
Probably need to take another break.
Webo, I'm saying to you, you must couple resources with leadership. And when you couple resources with leadership, and it is done right, it can't be wrong. And I'm saying to you, you have a commodity that is of global interest, global worth, and your people are suffering. It has to do with poor leadership. And this is why the other countries are now siding with Guado to say, hey, look, we believe that you can be a better leader than the one there, because the one who is there is forcing his people to flee. Why? Simply because the people lack food, lack proper housing, medicine, and the country has a lot of land. Call them in. What do you need? What do you need to stay? I need you to stay. And therefore, I'm going to distribute more and more to you.
So you're admitting and agreeing that you're now utilizing or recommended one of Dr. Bartlett's socialist approaches.
It is a socialist approach to, in fact,
temporarily
quell the exodus of people.
Okay,
in your country.
so you will be using it, but temporarily.
Well, you do it as long as you have to ensure that your country remains stable.
Well, okay, so if it is forever, it is okay. Because remember, you are not a lover or an advocate for socialist system. But I'm saying that you have decided to recommend it
until you're able to teach them how to fish.
Right. So, but that's what I was asking you. So it's just a temporary to stabilize things.
Right.
And then you put in the capitalist system.
Exactly.
I got you. Just checking.
And then it's not rocket science. We all have
I got you. Now let's see what some callers think. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yes, good evening. This is the first time I'm calling in, and I'm so excited with Dr. Bartlett. Mr. Stanley does not really comprehend what is happening. America is the person to blame for that situation. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yes, everyone. Good night.
Good night again, okay? Enjoy your evening. Yes, Mr. Stanley.
The thing is, people do not understand the complexity of the problem. And as a result, they're looking for some scapegoat. They're blaming the United States for what? The United States obviously has always proposed democracy and for the democratization of the world.
Yep.
Afghanistan, you may have spoken about Afghanistan here. Iraq, we know exactly what has been happening with people. People have been killed. A multitude of people have been killed in these countries. Russia was in Afghanistan. Russia had to run because they're trying to say, get a system in place of the people, by the people, and for the people. But it doesn't happen because some of these countries are still barbarians, and in that regard,
barbarians.
In that regard, they begin to kill one another for power, without understanding that people,
Mr. Stanley,
of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Mr. Stanley, Ted is suggesting you take it back. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to take it back.
Well, let me just use the word barbaric.
Okay, so you take
All
it
right?
back.
I didn't take it back. I
You
just
didn't
changed.
take
I
just
changed
add,
the word.
you just add another word.
Barbarians.
They think as barbarians simply because they do not understand. They've killed people for very little, for nothing,
What are you talking
for
about?
power.
But how many people?
So what I'm saying to you, if you have the democratization of a country, of the people, for the people, by the people, then you know power would be vested in the hands of the leadership of the people, by the people, and for the people. And as a result, things would go easier. You don't have a civil war in the United States. You don't have a civil war in Britain. You don't have a civil war in France. Of course, they have had a civil war many, many years ago. But at this juncture, they are able to have a system in place.
Let me take this. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yes, good evening, Rebel. What nonsense is Mr. Stanley speaking about? Didn't he hear on the written news just a couple of days ago that the government in Venezuela wanted to sell some of the gold they had to buy some foodstuff and whatnot for the country? And who told them that they couldn't sell their gold? Or they told I think it was the United Arab Emirates, that they should not buy their gold. So who is going to take this blame? It has to be the U.S.
Look, I could give you a case in point. We have people who are envious, grudge, bad-minded. Every 3 days I got to fix a sign down on the waterfront because people just feel that that sign shouldn't be there. Why don't they leave by sign alone? And I'm just saying to you, if the United States realizes that this man is going to bring Russia into our backyard, and then we must set up some guidelines as to how we can get Venezuela back onto the road of democratization and allow the people them to go back into their country. And I'm saying to you, you have to be influential and you have to guide. Somebody has to lead. Somebody has to lead the world. So those people who don't understand that by saying that they told the United Arab Emirates not to buy the gold. The United States has a responsibility to ensure that we have a stable world. We have a crazy man there right now leading the country. But at the same time, if you go to look at all the systems in place to ensure that the world remains stable, then somebody has to do it.
That's what the United Nations is about. To have a Security Council for all that. Mr. Stanley,
all these institutions are in place to ensure we have
United States does not own the world.
It doesn't own the world, but it runs the world. And you have to understand
that United States does not run the world.
There are people who are running countries, and if you don't allow certain people to do certain things, you know how many people got killed in Iraq on the... I'm not saying that Saddam Hussein was
the U.S. orchestrated that.
But I'm saying to you that
as America killed.
There are people who, in certain countries, who just disregard human rights.
But that is their country.
So you're going to stand by... That's what United Nations came about.
Yeah, but
to ensure that certain guidelines are put in place
the United
guarantee...
Nations resolve those matters, not America.
Not America. America can be...
United States doesn't resolve all the problems. Through the process of United Nations, we know that they have to have votes, and those countries have to be guided by certain policies pushed out by the United Nations.
Let's go. Ted, go ahead and make the point, and then we...
Mr. Stanley, America went into Vietnam. The records show that over 3 million people were killed, and they still have to leave Vietnam. They've gone into Afghanistan, and recently there's an agreement for America to leave the Taliban in power. And wherever they have gone, they've gone into Libya, mess up the whole place there. They've gone into Iraq and generally leave confusion. And you still think they have a right to interfere in other people's country?
But you know how long these countries have been divided up by Britain and the other countries? Years ago, in 1948...
But they are independent country, members of the United Nations, and have rights.
Even though you have sovereignty, it doesn't mean that sovereignty gives you the right to
But who
kill
gives
you,
America
kill
the
people.
right to intervene in
Americans
other
do that all the
countries?
time.
You have to be able to influence,
Give
guide
them the
with the
right
hope that the guidance and the recommendation that you have made, it is a plus, and people will be guided by these recommendations to bring a more stable, a more civilized world, so to speak, and where the quality of life would be enhanced for all of us. United States is not going in there just to say, I'm going to go in and do this because I know it's going to cause confusion, and ultimately the people would suffer. That's not its policy. It doesn't go in there for that purpose. It went in there to, again, hoping that a system of the people, by the people, for the people can be established to the degree where people now begin.
So why don't they go into North Korea then? So why don't they go into North Korea? Why don't they go into China?
They will.
When?
They will.
So why are they going to pick on Venezuela?
You wait.
Come on, man. Mr.
You
Stanley, Webo, I wanted to give Mr. Stanley a little bit of advice, but I think I'm not going to give him.
You can't give me any advice. So you're going to give me advice when you don't take it for your own self?
So I'm not going to give him any advice, but I just want us, as a panel, I want us to, be guided. The thing is, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. I read this quote. It's not mine. I'm not laying quote to it. And it says, "Do not increase or don't raise your voice. Just increase your argument." Mr. Stanley's been saying the same thing over and over, but he's saying it louder each time. That doesn't make it right. The mass exodus that we are seeing vis-a-vis in Venezuela, you're not seeing that in other places. It is all about ideology. The United States and others like them think that everybody ought to be practicing democracy the way they practice it. Everybody ought to have a system in place that says that the capitalist system in place that says that the strong should overcome the weak and is the survival of the fittest. So if Naya were here, he would be talking about the 20%, and it is much less than 20%, probably, half of, but not even half of that, probably just 2% of the people who own all the reserves that you're making reference to, all the people who go into, and what has been happening is that America, with the companies that originate there, been going into other countries, reaping all that they could, leave them when they can't extract anymore. When they reach to the point that they're taking blood out of stone, then is when they leave, and they leave you dry. I mean, it happens in all countries that had resources. They're now moving into Guyana because Guyana potentially would have some oil that they could draw on. So I just want Stanley just to take a little time, to catch up with what is going on, because the mass exodus didn't happen when Chavez was in Venezuela. It didn't happen in the first term with Maduro. What has happened within recent times, and everyone knows that oil, you pump as much oil as you wish, it goes on the international market, but there's just so much, for people to consume. You can't push on people more than they want to, and people are going into clean energy as well. And so oil has taken a hit within recent times. It is true that Guyana started to slip, and like most countries, after a while you find your footing, because you may find some other, they might have been able to export more gold or whatever. They didn't have that opportunity, to rebound from that. What has happened is that there's been a pile-on after that, because people saw the opportunity. It's about time now, because we have what they call a communist in the region, and they can't deal with that, but they have to come to terms with that. I'm not saying that I am applauding any dictator. There are signs, obviously, that Maduro is probably moving towards being more of a dictator than I, would like. That is the reason why I would have advocated, and I like the outcome that we had here when the elections were called, because we had someone who was moving towards being a dictator. I don't like that, But with all that said, you don't find the U.S. going into other places that they're practicing communism, or socialism, or whatever you want to call it. You don't see, you see right now Trump is, beckoning to North Korea. I mean, he wants to be friends. You know, he's putting aside the fact that they have human rights violations there too, probably even more so than you have in Venezuela. But he wants to be friends with the crazy boy there. I mean, that is his right, I guess. He's socializing, you know, and you don't see him going into China to try to obtain the same thing. Well, why are they picking on Venezuela?
Mr. Brand.
The United States have a particular view, Webbo, of what the world should be like. And a place like Russia also have a contrary view of what the world should be like. Mr. Hobson spoke about the various wars that both the United States and Russia would have fought over the last, 50 years, 75 years. Vietnam. United States went into Vietnam to, in my mind, try and stop the stem of communism and dictatorship and those kind of things. Russia, on the other hand, would have sought to expand their territory by annexing some of these states to spread the message of communism. And every time, it's like Russia make a move, America does a counterbalance, so to speak. Places like Afghanistan, Iraq, we are now in Syria with this bloody war. Right now in Syria, look at Syria. Situation in Syria, you have Russia on one side, and you have America on the other side, and the people are caught in the middle. We are speaking about Venezuela. And Venezuela is, in my mind, on the road map, so to speak, on the journey, so to speak, to become a part of this communism, dictatorship kind of road. The United States would have acted as a counterbalance to that. Dr. Bartley spoke about freezing the assets of Venezuela. The oil monies and the gold and so on and so forth. That to me is an attempt to squeeze out the dictatorship leadership in Venezuela. I think it was Mr. Stanley or Mr. Hobson spoke about Russia would have already sent warplanes to Venezuela. You have these counterbalance between Russia and the United States. The ideology and the thinking and the outlook of the world for both of these nations are totally different, right? We are seeing right now in Venezuela a number of countries are siding with the young leader, can't even remember his name, and there are also other countries that are siding with Maduro. And you're having this counterbalance. But Webbo, you know the sad thing about all of this? You have the crossfire, and the people are the ones who are suffering.
That's true.
People are the ones who are suffering. And Mr. Hobson spoke about 3+ million people in Vietnam, untold persons who would have died in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in all of these countries.
In Nicaragua,
all of these countries.
They interfere all
where you have the different ideology. Because that is what this is. This is a play for both the United States and Russia to spread their ideology. And in the middle of it, in the crossfire of it, people are dying.
Well, is that the essence of life itself, though? Because people are going to have different and varying views, good versus evil. And the person who advocates this is good truly believes it, right? And he thinks that the other person's point of view is evil. But the other person thinks, well, my point of view is good, and that's evil. Yeah. And so you have, and that in essence is life itself, correct? So you must always have these, and you must always have these, differences, right? But here's a question I want to ask, though. How much does the culture of the people have to do with all this? For instance, depending on how the philosophy or the thinking of, let's say, the people in Libya are, maybe it might not be a smart idea to use our style of governance or living for them.
Absolutely.
Quite right.
But
then, I mean, England.
Then when you look at it, the end result is a lot of killing, and ultimately, when you hear of killings as such, as a human being yourself, you would say, it's not right. And therefore, you would gravitate to a country or a policy that will be able to give people the right to live and to live the quality of life that we expect, to have food, clothing, shelter, education, as the case might be, good health, as the case might be. And in that regard, you would always attempt to subscribe to that notion or to that ideology. These Caribbean islands, we have had stability in these islands for many years. We were an agrarian society, and we are emerging from that agrarian society into maybe the information age, so to speak. And you look at the quality of life in these islands. We know we no longer live in thatch houses. We drive nice cars. We have good education. How did it come about? All these countries that have been led by certain people, and the international companies went in and took what they took out. There were leaders in there who allowed it. Why? There were elections held in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and he got 90-something% of the votes.
But
that is how it was controlled. Elections were held in Iraq after its invasion, the invasion of the United States forces or the Allied forces. And we know democracy, some semblance of it was beginning to emerge.
Okay, just let me take this. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, you're on the air.
Hi, yes. I just like to add a 2 cents to the debate. I really do not think that what is happening in Venezuela has much to do with the fact that it's socialist. I mean, if you look at countries like China, U.S. is dealing with them. Russia, the big adversary, they still have some dealings with. Limited as it is. Saudi Arabia has some atrocious record on human rights. They themselves are a dictatorship. But what it comes down to, if you look at the last places where the U.S. intervened, deposing leaders, whether by economic or military reasons, if you add up the last 4, in 91, they went supposedly to save Kuwait from Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein just came off then of almost a decade war on their behalf with Iran. They aided the formation of the United Arab Emirates. Then they went after Saddam himself. Then they deposed Gaddafi. If you look at all these countries, now Venezuela, they all have the largest oil reserves in the world. The top 10 are those countries, plus Canada, which is their ally. They themselves are now on the number 10. And the 2 remaining countries are Russia and Iran. Now, all of the conflict or the hardships in Venezuela was caused by the U.S. because they deflated the oil, the price of oil.
Price, yeah.
They jack up their production. They have this new technology what's called fracking, where they're actually breaking the rock and extracting oil from places where before that technology wasn't available. So they are actually now the one of the largest oil producers. So they wreak havoc on the Venezuelan economy, specifically for this purpose, so they can get rid of Maduro and have someone who is more, along their lines, so that they control the oil reserves. As much as we're talking about renewable oil still on the world.
Well, caller, might I ask you a question for clarification?
Yes.
So, based on the argument that you're making, is it reasonable to deduce that should the leader be deposed, you think the price of oil will go back up?
It's not going to go back up immediately because they're still going to use it as a tool against the two remaining foes, which is
Iran
and Russia. Russia's economy is largely based on oil also. The saving base for Russia is that they also export a lot of arms, which is why, understandably, they're always stirring up conflict because traditionally when oil conflict, people want weapons, which is more money for them. So the economy is based on oil and weapons. So then controlling most of the oil reserves, you control the market. You control the reserve, you control the market, you control the world. That's what it's about. They're not picking any fight with Saudi Arabia and a lot of the other countries that has, atrocious human rights issues. They're dealing with China. China is pretty much a socialist state. But you don't hear them making those arguments. They make those arguments in places where they want to go in because they need, of course, or they want the support of the American people and, their allies, so to speak. But most of them are on the same page. Canada, U.S., UK, and a lot of Western Europe, they're all on the same page. It's about controlling the resources of the world, basically. All those places in Africa where there's all these things going on, you have terrorism now with Boko Haram and how many others. They're not intervening there because what? The resources that are there, they're already controlling one way or the other.
Okay. All right. Thanks much.
Cheers.
Okay. All right. I got to get a break. But, Edric, I got a light moment when I go before I go to this break, right? You mentioned earlier that you were going to talk about airplanes or airports or something at some point.
Well, it is being taken care of.
Yeah, but the question I asked you, did you say it?
Yes, I did.
Yes, that's what I'm
I did.
right. So, in that vein and under the topic, I thought you were going to mention, because I saw in the news this evening, the world news, that there was a gentleman, a pilot, who was flying a plane or something like that, and they found out that he had a fake license.
Is that right, Webo?
It is right. This is Thought That Get Results. We'll be back after these.
With all the power from the tower, this is the powerhouse of the Eastern Caribbean, VON Radio, from the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
So what do you think about that?
Well, that is very likely. But
it's very likely?
It's very likely
Oh,
based on
really?
what you've heard.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying to you is that where I actually flew, you can't have any fake license there. And
Yep.
for me, I was never involved in anything fake.
Yeah, but I wasn't talking about you. I just as you.
Well, you know, we have had the
It's just a light moment.
The debate here, and as a result, we always have to carry to conclusion.
Yeah.
All right.
Just per chance anybody, conclude.
Right.
Okay. But while we're on that though, but I wanted to make the point or to have the discussion concerning the motion of no confidence that people seemingly are using almost willy-nilly now, and ask the question whether or not we expect that it will continue to be used, number one, and secondly, to Ted, whether or not, from a legal standpoint, Ted, you think anything can be done if we find that it is, for instance, there's nothing to stop, let's say, the opposition to, let's say, next month, present another one, for instance. So, and here, and also in the other islands and so on, because it seems as if the same pattern is happening with just about everything. And so I'm just wondering, looking ahead, and what it would mean basically for the islands.
Yeah, well, you know, the constitution of all these countries in the Caribbean who got their constitution from the British. As a matter of fact, not about a month ago, or less than a month ago, they had a motion of no confidence in England as well, which failed. But the provisions are there, and I expect that it all depends on how these opposition feel. If they feel that
Ted, let me just accommodate this, and I'll come back to you. Thank you for holding. Good evening. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, I was saying that I expect to see many more of these. I listened to Dr. Douglas a few days ago, in which he was saying that the election will be in March this year. He's almost certain about that, he said. And, well, it doesn't look to me as if there's going to be an election in March. So I suspect soon after that he's going to raise another, because he was dissatisfied with the last one. He felt that he was being cheated by the speaker. So I imagine he would also raise another motion of no confidence. And you're going to see that popping up all over the Caribbean.
So my question is, Ted, it's a constitutional right.
It's constitutional right,
and thus nothing can be done.
Nothing could be done. I mean,
but it doesn't it disrupt the society?
Of course,
yes.
it raises tension,
and so we can expect that sort of thing as a society going forward. Then
yes, as Pat indicated, people are going to do exactly that sort of thing. And I don't know that we can do anything about it. They have a right to do it, and they're going to do it. They're not concerned about the people. They're concerned about their urge to get into office. And they feel that by bringing these issues, they get a platform in which to spread their views about government and about the ills of the government and so forth. And all it is a platform that they get an opportunity in a formalized way in the parliament, the People's Parliament, to attack the government. And so it will continue, and I don't see any way in which one could stop it. I mean, the speaker, if the speaker tried that with the one before in 2014 or whenever, 2013 when the motion was issued, and he kept it for 2 years, and after that I don't see anything like that happening again.
But in the end, Edric, could it be counterproductive though? Could it afterwards backfire if it's called too often?
Well,
and so on?
we have seen it, even though it has not been called too often. We have seen the counterproductivity of it, because what happened is that one was brought against him. And let me bring this to the fore. We love cricket, we play cricket. As soon as you got out, you realize what mistake you made, and you would like to get back in to correct the mistake you made. So the motion of no confidence is just a backdoor toward getting back into the wicket of governance. And therefore, they will always bring it to the fore, a motion of no confidence. At the same time, we know what happened to that one. We have elaborated on it quite often here. I know Dr. Douglas was relying heavily on the speaker to be the guard at the gate to ensure that it didn't happen. And that's why it was prolonged for such a period. Now, we know the one that was brought this time which is opposite. We know it stood a chance like a snowball in hell. It just would not have happened. As a result, we didn't even talk about it, although I had it on my list quite many moons ago.
Maybe what you should start to do, again, is put things on your desk instead of on a list. Because you're saying every time you have these things on the list, they don't see the light of day. So no, I'm serious. When you used to store a thing on your desk, it used to be more effective. You would agree with that.
It's the motion of no confidence that Dr. Douglas brought in this session that would not have stood the light of day, or it had a chance to snowball in hell, because it just would not have passed. And the speaker did very well, tactically, to abroad it right away, because it's not going anywhere. You understand? It didn't go anywhere, couldn't go anywhere.
Christmas Eve.
You understand? Couldn't go anywhere. But that's the game that is played, and you have to know exactly what your position is, what your strengths and weaknesses are.
But could the public or the electorate at some point see and understand the game, and could it backfire? That's the question I'm asking.
Well, one wouldn't know until election time.
The public, of course, is just the standby, more or less, to see what's going on in Parliament. We can't do anything until the parliamentarians determine where we are. The Prime Minister decides he's going to call an election, as the case might be. So all we got to do is to wait on the powers that be to make that determination or that decision, and then we, the voters, get an opportunity to determine whether or not we're going to give them another game in the wicket, or we're going to put somebody else in.
Ted, was the intent of the right or the motion of no confidence in the Constitution, was the intent of it to be used when it is basically likely, more likely?
It was the intent of this clause was to give the country an opportunity when a government has become so unpopular. So and it is clearly unpopular for a motion of no confidence to be raised. It anticipated a situation where there's a crisis situation in the country. And so therefore, you can use that mechanism. And if you can mobilize the support of the majority, then of course you have a chance of forcing a new election.
So, and in essence then, if it were to be just used as frequently and with seemingly hardly any chance of it succeeding, one can basically conclude it is basically an abuse.
It's an abuse, really. Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
I think the public will have to determine that.
Yes.
The public will have to determine that.
But then again, Ted, that is why, and when you use the word, I'm not qualified to use that adjective, but barbaric. I'm not qualified for that. But that is why in the Parliament they give people the title of honorable.
Yeah.
So that they're saying that if you're there, then you should be of a certain...
Act honorably.
Yes.
Yeah. That is why sometimes you wonder, whether people deserve that. But, that is the fact. We try to crown people with these things so that you understand that even if you don't, in yourself, normally honorable, when you reach in the Parliament, you must act honorably.
Supposed
to.
Well, in other places, if people who are on principle, you may have a parliamentarian who may resign on principle. Around here, that doesn't happen. So sometimes, I guess, to nudge people, you bring a motion of no confidence, But it's not going to happen for the most part around here. People are usually, split. It's a partisan thing. An aberration now and then, like in Guyana, it succeeded. I think the government probably had confidence that it might not have succeeded while they brought it, as they probably would try to prolong that too.
You're right there.
but the thing is, I don't know that the ploy, and I know that they don't think that the ploy is going to work, that you could, force a early election. I don't think that's it really. It's just that sometimes to damage the government, to say things that could be damaging, to the reputation of the people with, you know, parliamentary immunity, and I hold fast to that. I think that is what the ploy is all about. I don't think it has anything necessarily with forcing, because it's not likely that you'll be able to force a new election with a motion of no confidence in a popular, government that is popular with the people.
And by the very idea of having a motion of no confidence, they're hoping it mobilize the attention of the public, in a formal way to listen. And that is why they do it.
But that's on one hand, but on the other hand, you can't argue with it because it's a strategy, right?
Definitely.
Right?
Exactly. And it tells you that the other side is thinking. I know it's not going to pass, but at the same time, we're going to try something, and ultimately, it is to get the attention of the voters and to also sharpen their issues for the upcoming election, whenever it will be called. So once they bring these to the fore, because if you listened, Dr. Douglas enumerated all these areas, and I'm certain that you would hear these utterances on the platform in the next election. They're sharpening, they're sharpening their skills with regard to the issues. So.
Not with the same gusto, I promise you. The things that they would have said inside the parliament, they're not going to go out and say them.
Well, they may not be as...
They're not going to say them on the platform like that. They have the opportunities to, tarnish the reputation in parliament, and so that when you get out, you're broken and they have a better chance of succeeding that way. Because by then, everybody would think, because it has been said that is true. You don't have to prove it if you're in parliament, but, outside you'll have to.
Weber,
yes.
I don't like the idea that we just won a nice little game in cricket by beating England, and then no one to penalize our captain.
Ridiculous.
Ridiculous. I'd like to grab the attention of the public to sort of record my congratulations to the West Indies.
Okay, Ted, let me put that on hold and accommodate these callers. Caller, good evening. Could you go ahead?
Good evening, Webo. This is Michael Perkins. I don't usually do this, but I thought I should call and just shed a little light on part of your discussion tonight to do with motions and how they are handled by the House. And I would just want to read a section of our standing orders, and that's section 38, which speaks about the reintroduction of motions. And it says that no motion shall be proposed which is the same in substance as any motion which shall have been resolved by the National Assembly in the affirmative or negative during the previous 6 months. So, in effect, what that is saying that once a motion is debated in the House and has been resolved via a vote, that motion cannot be brought back to the House. Once it is pretty much the same motion. So I think that in itself would shed some light as to how we move forward, having heard a motion debated in December. The rules do not allow for a similar motion or the same motion to be brought back within a 6-month period. So I hope that would have helped the discussion. And
yes, it does, and we're much appreciative of it. But might I ask a question?
Certainly.
But so it's obvious then that you can bring one every 6 months.
That would be my.
That's allowable.
Yes.
If of the same content, right? And then keep in mind that people are very crafty. So if I were to bring one 6 months and I lay out the reasons why I'm bringing it, but I can bring one 3 months later, based on a major development that might have taken place, a major negative development in my view. as a parliamentarian?
Well, I think there and then is where the discretion of the speaker comes into play, his interpretation of the motion before him, because he would have to decide, is this motion similar or pretty much the one? So there's where, like I said, the discretion.
Okay, so in essence, when the speaker gets the motion, he has the jurisdiction to look at it, examine it, and then decide whether or not he'll bring it forth to be heard?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
That's pretty much the case. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Hello, good evening.
Thank you. Yes, you're on the air. Could you go ahead?
Yeah, 3 questions. First, I listened to the guy talking about West Indies captain being penalized. You guys are lawyers. You don't talk about the rules. The rules state if you twice or 3 times had a slow over rate, you shall be penalized. Many weeks you guys come and talking about the rules. Let's move on. Secondly, have you guys heard about what happened in the courthouse in St. Kitts yesterday? And the other one is, it's very interesting to see that the Prime Minister and Mark Brantley can go wherever they're gone to dialogue about Venezuela. He went to United Nations, dialogue about Venezuela. What can we call for the past couple of years? No dialogue with Douglas. No dialogue with the citizens. You have a situation at the airport. You have the situation with the police. You have the situation with Larry Vaughan. You have the situation with NATO. But nobody want a dialogue. But our Prime Minister gone to Venezuela, Mark Brantley them, or wherever they're gone to dialogue with Venezuela when the guy treating the people down there like dogs. This is unbelievable. This is unacceptable. Do not dialogue with your citizens. We're going all over the world to dialogue. Guys, have a good night.
Okay. Caller.
No,
he's not gone yet. Caller, could I ask you a question? Okay, he's gone. Okay, so Mr. Hobson, sorry, let's get back to you. Yes.
Congratulations to the West Indies for 2 brilliant victories. They showed enormous commitment and brilliance in those 2 matches. They're being praised for them coming from all over the world, the way they have buckled down in those 2 matches. And, you know, we criticize them when they fail, but I think when they do well, we must give them credit. And I hope they'll continue to perform the way they have performed over the last 2 test matches.
I would like to associate myself with the comments that Mr. Hobson would have made as it relates to the victory of the West Indies over England. I have the same view. Well, let me not say I have the same view, because I don't think Mr. Hobson got a chance to even, complete the statement that he was making as it related to the decision of the ICC to suspend the captain, the West Indies captain, because of the violation of the slow thing. I mean, some things just require, I think,
common sense.
Well, I don't even want to use common sense, but reasonableness. It's not reasonable that a game finished 3 days. You have 2 extra days, and you're going to penalize the man and say that these things. Within the context of the game, I mean
it's crazy.
What about the people who would have paid to see a game for 5 days?
Yeah, but to be fair, number one, the caller says that's this prescribed law.
No,
but something is discretionary.
Work with me.
Yes, I know what he said.
Work with me. He pointed out it was this prescribed law which was followed and the captain accepted. Number 2, is it not true that the points that you are bringing, Dr. Bartlett and Mr. Hobson, about the game finishing early, were that those things you think were not taken into consideration when the law was made?
No.
And it was made notwithstanding?
I don't think
no,
it was a consideration.
That was the whole idea.
It was an oversight.
That idea came about when you have a team facing a defeat and try to slow down the game deliberately.
Right. Yeah, but it would have said it.
No,
wouldn't it?
But it was an oversight.
No, come on, Mr. Hobson.
It was an oversight.
No.
Because
look, I have been looking at comments made by the experts over the world about the decision, and they all thought it was wrong because they have to use their discretion. A match finished within 3 days. I mean, the idea of this ruling was that when you're trying to draw matches, when you're trying to, to frustrate.
Yeah,
but there was no
that's what the
intent to
of it.
frustrate.
Right.
No.
Yeah, but Mr. Hobson, though, that is an interpretation. But did it have any footnotes? How do you know that it was for that, or was it just strict that you must not do it, regardless? Because if you do it, right, it starts slows down the game, and it's a little more boring.
Yeah.
And perhaps part of the reason was to get the game moving, whether or not it's going to finish quick or not.
But what was boring?
And that was one of the things
Finish quick.
when people used to just draw games,
Yeah.
That's why they put in
When
the
deliberately
rules.
try to draw.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Good evening again, Mr. Weber. I like what you said, work with you. That is the rules, ma'am. It's not the first and the second time. They need to take stock of the time wasting. I could remember some years ago, West Indies draw game where they send out the do all kind of thing. That is the rules. You guys are bent on the rules.
Yeah,
that's the rules in law, ma'am. There's nothing around it. The rules state if you waste time, no matter when the game finishes, same thing outside the night, and then Tiger shot. It doesn't matter how quick the game finishes.
Yes.
The rules state that you're supposed to bowl 90 overs within whatever time. That is the rules, ma'am.
And
That can't change.
it's also akin to if you said to people you don't come late, and then you start to say, well, I have a great excuse, you'll be in trouble. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yeah, good night. But yeah, if the man is holding having ball over them more, is the material them quicker? So then the man they want to pay the money would not see much of the game.
Okay.
I haven't seen the rules myself, so I don't want to get into that. I am only commenting on what experts I've seen around the region who have commented on it, and they all thought it was wrong decision.
The latest one today was Shane Warne, and Shane Warne gave them a lashing for that.
Yeah, but you see, sometimes you can have what people call, in the end, a bad law. But you cannot fault the judge at the time to follow it, because that is what you're supposed to do. And then, having realized it is a bad law, then you go to the procedure and you do the necessary corrections.
Yeah, I think it's time for them to
Well,
revisit
the
that.
sanction, I don't know if the sanction, the rules dictate what the sanction will be, but it could have been reprimanded.
No, it does. It does dictate. It seemed to have been pretty specific. It says if it happens so and so, then automatically this is a
the captain has to.
Yes. And that is why I think the captain accepted it without protest.
Yeah.
And so on.
That's why you need more women involved in these things, because a woman will just explore all possibilities and say, but so what, and probe and say, so
Well,
what happens
I'm
if it
hoping this
finish
incident
early? Why you want to speak over me? Because I'm saying proposing that a woman should have been there to rationalize the game, the rules. I mean, the rules need to be revisited.
Sorry.
The rules need to be revisited. It's about time. Somebody, and you can't just be hell bent on saying, well, that is the rule. If it doesn't make any sense in applying it, then But like you say, he accepted the punishment.
But not only that, but also sometimes when you begin to flesh things out, something that you think didn't make sense, and especially if it starts to affect you, you may find, well, then again, it does make some sense, So, yes, Mr. Edric.
I just want to send my condolences out to the late David, who actually died on that motorcycle today.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, as young
Mr.
men,
Stanley,
yes?
one of the things I do not like to do
I understand
is to call these names and so on, especially in the very early.
Well, I know the family very well.
Listen.
Let me listen.
I understand you want to send the condolences to the people who might have suffered and so, but let's.
Well, I want to go beyond that.
Yeah, but let's leave it there.
But let me talk about something.
Yes.
Along that same vein.
You see, let me just say this, right? sometimes we have very good intent. And we've had some examples here. You see, only who feels it knows it. We've had a couple of incidents where with good intent people come here and they say certain things. We've had 1 or 2 examples where people were saying somebody was dead. And then they came and they said with very good intent, but sorry afterwards can't repair it for the family, right? So we are not in any race to try and get, so that is why there are a lot of things that I know that I would have heard. But I wait until a particular time and then say it. Because at the end of the day, people begin to say, and I will say in the, you said, Ted, for 30 years, ask Ted how much time we got to go be defending things. Because people sometimes, they know it was not malintent, but they come after you. And so on. So that is why I'm saying it. So it is no real great thing that we have to say this. You know what I'm saying? We still have time.
Okay, well,
so that's why I just wanted to be clear. Yes.
I want to get beyond that to say something regarding myself and other young people at age 18, 17, 16, 19, 20, in terms of how we operate on the road, whether it's a bicycle, motorcycle, car. And the insurance companies took that into consideration, that they ensure that anybody who's under the age of 25, the premium would be increased simply because of the risk we, young people, take with reference to vehicles. I used to ride my bike coming from church ground, and it couldn't go fast enough. I eventually got into a car, and it couldn't go fast enough. I rode horses in race, and they just couldn't go fast enough. And I'm just saying,
what about donkey?
I'm just saying to you, and to send out this to
a donkey myself.
And to send this out to...
He just knows when to bring in a light moment.
Well, I mean, of course, laughter is good.
Yeah,
but I'm trying to make a point to...
So, but the point, with the horses though, when you say that the horses couldn't go fast enough, are you suggesting that you lose the races?
Well, I've lost because I came in second.
Just checking.
I am wondering if it's actually the horse or the jockey.
No, listen. I could tell you that I won races and I lost races. You understand?
And that's when the horse wouldn't go fast enough.
Well, whatever category you want to put it in. But again, I wanted to emphasize that the young people, because I'm up there and sometimes I see these guys would pull the front wheel of the motorcycle and they would, it's very skillful, but accidents happen in the twinkle of an eye. And in that regard, we as people have to send the warning out to the young people that they have to be very, very careful when it comes to operating these vehicles, whether it's a car, motorcycle, truck, as the case might be, because it sometimes becomes very fatal. So those who are hearing my voice through the mic of on radio, please take heed. Webo.
Yes.
Webo, I want to associate myself with the comments by both Mr. Hobson and Dr. Bartlett for the way in which West Indies would have played the last 2 test matches. I think, Webo, that it showed us a little bit of what we used to call calypso cricket once again. And I am just hoping that it's a turn around the corner. I think for a team like England, who have just came off of 5 consecutive test match win, to see the way in which the West Indies would have handled them, I think that it leaves great hope for the people of the Caribbean. I am hoping, Webo, that the next test match, even though that the West Indies would be without their captain, that they can still show the same fight and the same grit to continue to inspire the people of the Caribbean. I certainly want to wish them all the best in the next test match, and continued success for the rest of the series.
I mean, I like cricket. I enjoy cricket, and to be honest, for the past few years, I haven't really watched. I listened, but in the past years, all we got to do is to find out how badly we have beaten them. But now, we've been getting so much licks that we have now gotten into a nice victory run, and I hope we can keep it that way. It was really nice to have heard as to how we beaten England. And I hope these fellas on the West Indies team now would understand what they have to do, because I understood that the psyche had changed and those guys were just going after the money rather than, in fact, go after the money and also giving the spectators and the listeners and supporters of the Caribbean and the West Indies what we have been accustomed to over the number of years when we were at the top of our game.
That's the last word from Edric W. Stanley, Ted Hobson, Dr. Patricia Bartlett, the Honorable Spencer Brand. This program repeats tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock following the VON News Minute. Join the Honorable Mark Brantley tomorrow evening for On the Mark. Thank you all again for joining us. This is your voice in the community, Thought That Get Results. You all have a wonderful evening.
The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were solely those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Nevis Broadcasting Company Limited or its advertisers.
With all the power from the top.